Welcome to the Top Floor Podcast. I am your host, Darren Kanthal, and today we have Mr. Mike Clement, the president of Tolin Mechanical. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Darren. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
All right, good deal. Well, as we do on the show, I'm not going to read a bio, and so I'll turn it to you. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, as you said, I'm Mike Clement. My business title is president of Tolin Mechanical. We're a commercial and industrial HVAC service provider. But aside from being a president of a service provider and a relatively large organization, I'm also a husband and a father. I've got two boys that are 10 and 12. I get involved in coaching and their sports experiences and outside of work and coaching and family. I love the outdoors and the Colorado lifestyle, mountain biking and skiing, and try to do that as much as possible outside of work and do that with my family. So yeah, family man, business leader, and happy to be here today and excited to chat with you a little bit.
Awesome. Well, I have to say you are, I think, the second guest who's a mountain biker.
Okay.
And so maybe in our future we'll share a bike ride together. I think we talked about this, right? Wait a second, you did a big race, didn't you?
I did, yes. And I finished it. It was really tough. It was challenging. It's one of those things where I used to do some competing in adventure sports and endurance sports when I was a little bit younger, when I had more hours to train, when I didn't have the family and other commitments that I have. And I'd gotten away from that over the years, and I still love, physical activity and mountain biking and skiing and that sort of thing. But I hadn't really trained in a long time to compete in a race. And I had hip surgery last year and was trying to figure out a way to recover and wanted both the physical and mental challenge. And so I don't know what drove me to it, but I saw this big race that happened about a month ago down in central Colorado. It was a 125-mile mountain bike race, about 17,000 feet of climbing. We started at 10 p.m. at night. And, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I finished. There's a few dark moments along the way. But started at 10 p.m. on a Saturday evening and finished just before 5:30 the next evening. So it took about 19 and a half hours, and it was a challenge, but it was one of those things where big feeling of pride and accomplishment, and like, hey, I can still push myself like I used to when I was younger if I really want to. So it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I tip my invisible hat to you. That is impressive. That is
Thank you.
impressive.
Thanks.
All right, so I want to stay there for a minute if we can.
Sure.
I'm curious. I know it's both. What was harder for you? Was it the mental game or the physical game throughout those 19 hours?
I think it really is the mental game, especially when you're riding in the middle of the night and you're by yourself for hours at a time. And to fuel yourself for a race like that, you just have to continuously be eating carbs and sugar and electrolytes. And that's not something, obviously, I do on a regular basis anymore because I don't race real consistently. And so your stomach's kind of upset. And so there's certainly times where, you're not feeling well physically and you're out by yourself and you're kind of drained. But I think that's one of the things that I love about those sort of challenges is how far can you push yourself physically, and it's really a mental game at that point in time. I think the human body is capable of so many amazing things, and it's really a lot of it is mental that's holding most of us back. I think the highlight of the race was it was most of the way through the night. We had this big climb, hike a bike section. We got up to almost 13,000 feet, and the trail was like, I don't know if you've ever climbed a 14er, but the trail at the top was kind of like climbing a 14er couldn't even push the bike. You had to shoulder the bike. And that was a challenging part of the race, but I get up to the top and the sun's just coming up over the Continental Divide, and you can see the peaks, and the weather's starting to warm up a little bit, and you can turn the headlamp off, and you got the descent down the other side, and you feel kind of this wave of energy, and you feel kind of refreshed, and you keep going. So it was a mental challenge. It was a physical challenge too, but a lot of it was seeing how far you can push yourself, right?
Yeah. You ever listen to David Goggins?
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit.
I mean, that dude's an animal, and
He is an animal.
Think about his mind over matter mentality.
Yeah, and I like that. Like I said, there's a lot of things you can do if you put your mind to it that most people feel that they're not capable of, but with enough preparation, and it is kind of mind over matter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask something about your training.
Okay.
And I'll preface it by saying this, that, well, first, I'm impressed. So congratulations and kudos. Like, I know how hard that is, not because I've done it, but because I ride a bike.
Mm-hmm.
Two is, it is astounding to me how many leaders of organizations also engage in big endurance sports, Ironman, overnight 19-hour bike rides, whatever someone's race might be. And then I start to get into the tactical, which is where do you find the time? So I am somewhat curious about the time, but I'm also
Mhm.
curious about how you managed it. I mean, you got a wife and a family and a company and training. Like, how do you do all that stuff?
Yeah, well, I think the reason why I don't do it consistently is because the training does just take too much time. But, this was something that I really wanted to accomplish. I wanted to do. I wanted to see if I could still do it both mentally and physically after, not doing it for 15 or 20 years. So, everybody uses the word balance and trying to find a balance between your time and between personal life and work life and personal hobbies. I look at it as more of a tension, right? And sometimes, that tension pulls you more in one direction, and sometimes that tension pulls you more in another direction. And you just have to be intentional about not going too far in one direction or another. And I knew going into this, like, hey, I was going to have to put in more time for a couple of months prior to the race and get up at 4:30 in the morning and get out early for a bike ride before work with my headlamp on. And, there was a little time away from my family in the morning before the boys went off to school and probably coming into work a little bit late, but that was really a priority for me at that point in time. Since then, I finished that race about a month ago, and unfortunately, I've probably only been on my bike a couple of times since then. And it's not because I don't have the desire to get back on the bike, but after spending all that time training and racing, I've got some other priorities, and that tension's pulling me back to business and coaching my boys' sports teams and doing some other stuff. So it's kind of like, seasonality in the seasons of your life and in different phases of your life. I think those tensions, whether they be business or personal or family, they pull you in one direction or another. And sometimes you dedicate more time to one thing than the other, and just trying to, maintain that tension and not be pulled too far in one direction or another.
Yeah. I have
Yeah.
two comments. The first is there's a lot of talk about work-life balance in today's world.
Hmm.
And I think I'm making this up, but it almost seems like sometimes the assumption is that balance is 50-50.
Hmm.
And in work-life balance, if you like that term, I know some people don't, is balance to me is not necessarily 50-50. It's like the tension, as you're saying, right?
Hmm.
Your balance during the training was probably not 50-50 or 30-30-30 for the three things, family,
Yeah.
work, training. So
Yeah.
balance is different. And I think that's interesting. You call it tension, and I appreciate what you're saying. And so I just want to make that comment. I resonate with that.
Yeah, I agree. And I've always kind of struggled with that term balance, that work-life balance, because you're never going to maintain that perfect balance, right? You're always going to be off one way or another. And maybe you're trying to get to that balance. And there's times that you're up here and down here. But that's why, somebody introduced me to that term tension. And I kind of like that better because sometimes you're being pulled in one direction and sometimes you're being pulled in another direction, but trying to get back to the middle, in general and not be pulled too far in one direction or another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second comment I want to make is, and it's personal that I'm projecting and I'm making an assumption,
Hmm.
is it's a testament to your relationship with your wife too. Um, the reason I make it personal is I did a half Ironman some years ago, and my girlfriend Rachel was fully supportive.
Hmm.
Now, part of that support meant she helped me with my nutrition, make sure I had enough food, but she took care of stuff at home that I might normally have done as my contribution to our household. And
Hmm.
yes, there were some arguments and some apologies and acceptances of those apologies and forgiveness, but her
Hmm.
support was integral. Without it, there's no way I'd do that race and still have my sanity. So I'm making an
Yeah.
assumption that was your experience.
For sure. Yeah. My wife, Kate, is incredibly supportive. She does a lot to support me both in my business and with our family. And she's, trying to work and maintain a career. And so she does a lot of heavy lifting at home. And I'm appreciative of the support that she provides. Talking about mountain biking, she and I actually met on mountain bikes. We were at a bike festival and she was kind of a semi-pro racer in Boulder at that point in time, racing mountain bikes. She was there with some friends, and I was at this festival with some friends, and we ended up connecting. And for a while, we just got together and did some bikes and hikes, and we're friends. And then it kind of grew from there. So the reason I give that story and background is because it makes it easier for me to train for these sort of things because we still are passionate and have those common interests. And so she certainly was very supportive and helped out more with the kids and the family while I was trying to get in those training hours. But it was also something that we could do together on weekends. We'd go out and get a ride in together. And we try to travel every couple of years internationally and go bring our mountain bikes somewhere and explore a new country on mountain bikes. So it's nice to share that common passion as well.
Well, you and Kate, I am sure, would show Rachel and I up. We both mountain bike too, so maybe there's a future of the four of us riding.
Yeah,
That'd be way fun.
that would be awesome. And we're just out there to have a good time and be on our bikes. And, we're not racing or competing a whole lot anymore. So I enjoy getting out anytime I can, regardless
Love
of the
it.
level of riding. Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
All right. So that might be in our future. I look forward to that. We'll see how
All
it pans
right.
out.
Sounds good.
All right. Segueing just a little bit. We both, let me rephrase. When we first met, we had a similar story of how we arrived in Colorado. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear a little bit about your story.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Western New York, small town, a little bit south of Rochester, and ended up going to school even further upstate New York, near the Canadian border at Clarkson University, and earned my bachelor's of mechanical engineering there. And I got done with school, and I had done some construction work during the summertime, and was making decent money doing that. But I really didn't want to stay in Western New York. I wanted to explore other parts of the world, or other parts of the country. I really hadn't traveled out of the Northeast much until I had gotten to college, and then I spent a semester abroad my junior year of college, and really was kind of exposed to different cultures and different people in different parts of the world. And that kind of sparked my passion and curiosity for traveling and that sort of thing as well. And so I finished up with college and wanted to do something a little bit different and experience a different part of the country and get out of a small town. I grew up in a small town and went to college in a small town. And so there's a couple of buddies of mine at that point in time, one from high school and one from college. And we were all kind of in a similar situation. And so worked for a few months over the summer to save up some cash. And then the three of us hopped in a car, and I'll never forget, it was September 12th of 2001. So we were packing September 11th, the day that the planes hit the World Trade Center, and like, man, should we still leave? Should we still do this? And after talking about it and talking to our families, we decided to go on with it. We've been planning it for a while, but I had a brother that was actually living in New York at that point in time in Brooklyn, so it was kind of scary that it kind of hit close to home, right? But the three of us hopped in a car, and one of my friends had a sister that was living in Denver, and so we knew we were going to kind of make our way through Denver at one point in time, but we really didn't have a whole lot of a plan of where we wanted to be, or a whole lot of schedule that we wanted to stick to. And so it was really, I think the one time in my life where it just open to exploring and going where kind of the wind takes you, right? And so we'd plan a couple of days ahead, and we'd get there and we'd do some camping. And I'll never forget, one of the most memorable moments was when we were in Montana, and we pulled into, I think it was Red Lodge, Montana, this little small town in the mountains. And we wanted to do a backpacking trip. And so we went to the outdoor store and we got a map. We went to a local bar and we sat down and ordered a pitcher of beer and pulled out the map and engaged some of the other people at the bar in conversation. And somebody gave us some recommendations on a hike to do. And so we went out and did this 3-day backpack trip based on a recommendation of somebody we met at a bar in Montana. And we're out in the wilderness for 3 days without seeing another soul out there. And so just those sort of experiences, right? So made our way out to California and down the coast and back through Vegas and the Grand Canyon, and then ended up in Denver where my buddy's sister lived, and spent a week or two on her couch, and really didn't have anything pulling me back east. And we really loved the mountains of Colorado and, the lifestyle and the weather. And so ended up getting an apartment and figuring out a way to make it work. And here I am, 23 years later.
Yeah. Not to divert too much from your story, we have so many parallels. My brother lives in Rochester.
Okay.
I grew up downstate. I was living in New York City during 9/11.
Really?
My buddy and I also took a 30-day road trip that landed in Breckenridge, so not Denver. It was not direct. It was all over the country. We went across the top of the United States to Montana. I forgot how we got down to Arizona and then up through Durango into Breck.
Okay.
And Breck was my buddy Theo's high school's. My buddy Theo had a friend, Nick, in high school. Nick's brother, Rocco, lived in Breck. He was the reason we went to Breck.
All right.
So many parallels. So
yeah,
many.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I lived in Summit County for a number of years as well, and loved living up there in the mountains.
That's my dream, is to have a beach home and a mountain home, hopefully sooner than later. But that is the ultimate dream for me right now.
There you go. We got another parallel there.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's segue a little bit because when we were talking, you did mention how that road trip was really instrumental into clearly why we're on this call today, both in Colorado, but
Yeah.
also how it got you to Tolin.
Yeah.
Maybe give us that segue.
Sure. Yeah. So, I ended up landing in Denver after this month-long road trip. And again, that was an experience that I hadn't had before. Just kind of figuring out, I think, who I was as a man and what I wanted to do with my life after spending, 4 years in engineering school and being out on my own really for the first time. And so, getting our own apartment. And for the first couple of months, it was really just finding whatever work I could. So I was working for a temp agency and I was doing some banquet serving and I was doing some office work and just whatever I could to pay the bills, right? And this is back in 2001, really before smartphones became big. And so I remember I put on a suit and printed off a list of mechanical engineering firms and mechanical contractors and printed out a stack of resumes. And I just made my way around town, knocking on doors and handing out resumes. And Tolin was one of those. Walked in the front door, and the receptionist had a manager come out. And so it wasn't just, hey, left the resume with the receptionist. Somebody actually came out and engaged and had a conversation, and I was impressed. Had a couple of conversations with Tolin. They didn't really have an opening or need at that point in time, and I ended up pursuing another opportunity with a cooling tower manufacturer. And I was about 3 months into that, and I was second guessing my engineering degree, and I was sitting in a cubicle, doing takeoff off of a blueprint and not having a whole lot of personal interaction with other folks. And I was like, man, did I just waste the last 4 years of my life getting an engineering degree? Is this what I really want to do, right? And so I started poking around again after 4 or 5 or 6 months to see what other opportunities were out there. And Tolin had always kind of left an impression on me with the people that I met when I first knocked on the door and stopped in. And so I followed up with Tolin, and they had an older gentleman that was retiring from a sales engineering position. And so they brought me in as kind of a junior sales engineer, and I worked under him for a couple of months before he retired. And so that's how I got my start at Tolin. And, those first handful of months there were difficult as well. I think we spoke about it a little bit. I'm probably more of an introverted personality. And even though I had the engineering degree and the kind of the technical background and knew the basics, I didn't really know a whole lot about HVAC. And so I was a little bit out of my comfort zone in a sales role to begin with, being out in front of customers and trying to sell a solution that maybe I wasn't 100% confident in. But over time, and with some good leadership and mentorship, I became more comfortable with what I was selling, with the solutions. It became more technical. I spent a lot of time out in the field with our field technicians who were actually doing the work, trying to learn as much as I could about the actual equipment and what it took to replace a piece of equipment. And as I gained some more experience and some more confidence, and I became more successful at it. And I really enjoyed actually being out, and as opposed to the first job being stuck in a cubicle for 8 hours a day. As long as I was performing, like probably in any sales role, I had a lot of flexibility to be out in the field, to be meeting with people, to be using my analytical brain to develop solutions for problems. And so really ended up loving that role and excelled at that role. And that led to other opportunities in more leadership positions. So I went from that project sales engineering position and was offered an opportunity to run a small branch office of ours up in Silverthorne in Summit County. And so that's what brought me up there. I started there, and I was the only one in the office, and we had, I think, 4 technicians in the field at that point in time. So it was a small office that was having some problems gaining some traction and growing. And for me, that was, again, another big step, another big leap, taking me out of my comfort zone from being a sales rep to actually being, a manager. It was my first management experience. And, but again, kind of grew into that. There was speaking of mentors, there was a field tech that was a leader in that group that really, even though I was officially his manager, I think he was a big mentor of mine and taught me about management and leadership. And, I leaned on him a lot in those early days in my management, career and experience. And, ultimately we had a good team and we were successful growing that branch. And, today, as it stands, I think we've got 5 people in that office and about 25 technicians in the field, and it's a big piece of our business. So after a number of years and some success in that role, I was given the opportunity to transition into a VP role where I helped support a number of our branches. And then from there, into a COO role, which kind of pulled me back down to the Denver area from the mountains, and then took over as president a few years ago now.
Cool. What a story, man.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to comment. Sorry, did I just cut you off?
No, no. I was just going to say it's been an amazing ride. You kind of start your career out, and for me, I didn't have a whole lot of conviction on where I wanted to go or what I want to do with it, and to look back over the last 20 years and just kind of realize how things have evolved and the opportunities that have fallen in my lap and the people that I've had an opportunity to work with. It's a fun ride.
So cool.
Yeah.
Well, now I have 2 things to comment on. The first is I have to comment about you putting on the suit, printing off your resume, and knocking on doors. Right? As the old man in me, kids today will never know that, right? But as you said it, I mean, that's what we did, right? That was how we found jobs. There was there was Monster and Career Builder, but you still had to go knock on doors. So anyway, I just want to comment on kudos to you. The second is remarkable how long you've had a career at Tolin and your progression in the company. That's a little more of a unique experience in today's world.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like some of the cursory research I've done is the average employee tenure is somewhere between 2 and 3 years.
Wow.
And the fact that you found your enjoyment, resonance, place at Tolin, and they've treated you reciprocally, the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
But that's amazing. Like I don't hear that story all that often. So I'm really impressed that both they've treated you as well as you want to be treated, and you've been able to treat them and perform as well as they wanted to. So that's a remarkable piece of your story.
Yeah, thank you. I think some of that comes from my father. Growing up, he had been with the same company for 20 or 25 years. He's a very loyal man. And so I think I learned a lot of my work ethic and loyalty and some of those qualities and values that I have from my dad. So that's part of who I am, but I think it was also part of Tolin and how well we treat our employees and how much we value tenure and relationships and partnerships, not just with customers, but also with employees. We have a lot of people here at Tolin that probably break that mold of 2 or 3 years, that have been here for 10, 15, 20 years. We just had a gentleman that retired this past year after 22 years, and we actually celebrated earlier this year with a barbecue. We brought in some recent retirees and celebrated somebody that had 22 years, somebody that had 35 years, somebody that had 37 years. And so that's part of the culture at Tolin, is that we try to provide paths for development and growth for our people. And, for the most part, I think people enjoy working here and really feel like it's a family or team culture and keeps people here for a long time. So again, part of it's just my personal values and my upbringing, and I think part of it's the company that I was lucky enough to fall into and the culture of the company here at Tolin.
Man, you've put so much down. There's so many avenues that we can go down. So let's see where we go.
All right, sounds good.
The first thing I want to ask about is the tenure of you and also many others. And I'll be a little bit leading here. And if I'm leading us down the wrong path, just take us down a different path. So I'm a former HR guy. That's where I spent most of my corporate career. And now I work as an executive coach. So I do a lot of one-on-one with leaders. And I hear a lot of stories now and in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm going with this is the general belief, or I think the first knee-jerk response, is that people leave because they're not getting paid enough money. And there is truth to that, but it's not the full truth. Money is a component of satisfaction of job.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be respected. We want to do good work. We want to know our leaders care about us. We want to feel like we're making a difference in whatever corner of the world we do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You are not a anecdotal story, you, Mike, and also Tolin. You're not an anecdotal story. You are an actual story of putting something out there that has resulted in long tenure with many people.
Hmm.
And I'm curious specifically, what do you think that is, or what do you think those things are that have led to such great tenure?
Yeah, great question. I think it is a combination of a number of things. I think it probably starts with trying to find, and you're never gonna, bat 1,000 at this, but trying to find people that are the right fit for that culture, that have some of the same values that you think would fit in. And so, I think it starts with recruiting and hiring, the right people for the role and getting the right people in the right seats. You hear that, it's kind of cliche, but getting the right people to begin with that we feel are going to be the best fit for our company and our vision and what we want to do. And then it goes to, I think, training and development and mentorship, of those people, and investing in developing their skills, whether they be technical skills or whether they be people skills, management, leadership skills. Trying to do our best to remove obstacles and roadblocks, listening to people and what are their challenges that they have in their day-to-day role in our business, and how can we remove some of those roadblocks and make their job easier and make them more successful in their role. Um, and then I think after you do that, after you have the right people and you're, and training development is an ongoing thing for your entire career, but you're working on that and you're doing your best to remove obstacles and roadblocks. I think it's empowering people and giving them the autonomy to make decisions. And, that's where I think you really get people who take ownership of their piece of the business and they recognize how their piece of the business affects the overall success of Toll. And so again, it's the right people. I think it's training and development and mentorship. I think it's doing our best to remove obstacles for those folks. And then, trusting that you have the right people and they have the skill set and empowering them to make decisions and make mistakes, from time to time. And just as long as they're learning from those mistakes. I think those are a few of the key contributing factors to it.
Love it. I'm just looking over here making notes because I want to recap that before we say goodbye. That is
Okay.
tremendous. I speak about this sometimes in my own profession, and I only know how to make it personal because I don't know your world well enough. There are countless numbers of coaches out there, and we're all taught generally the same skill, but it's how we apply the skill in our unique way that makes the difference, right? Same as you as an engineer and all the folks on your team. You've given a formula that works for you and Tolin, which certainly could be washed and repeated elsewhere. How they do that may be different than the way you do it, but you've given a very succinct recipe. So I was taking notes and I'll recap that before we say goodbye. I really appreciate that. That's great.
Yeah, sounds
That
good.
is great.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback.
All right. So when I said earlier, we have a number of places to go. One of them is mentorship. And just for context, the context, but our listeners won't. You mentioned a couple of times in our introductory discussion the importance and the value of mentorship in your upbringing. Not so much childhood, unless that's true, but you said it, or the way I heard it, was more in your professional upbringing. You obviously mentioned it just a few minutes ago with the field technician, and you said it yet again, talking about, I wrote onboarding, training, development, and mentorship. So it's clear to me, at least, that mentorship plays an important role for you, for Tolin, for your employees. And I don't know the exact question to ask, but I am curious about the role of mentorship. Maybe I do know the right question to ask. Let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about how did you uncover or find these mentors, and how did they assume that formal role, if that's a fair way to say it?
Yeah, and I don't know early in my career that there was that formality, right? I think part of it is, just good fortune and being at a good company that has a lot of good people that care about, the well-being and the success of others. So part of it is the culture of Toll. But looking back earlier on in my career, I wasn't necessarily very intentional about it. And I don't know that I realized how important it is for the success, of people and for the tenure people and keeping people here at Toll. And so I think, I was just lucky to have some strong managers, leaders that I worked for earlier in my career that, really kind of took me under their wing and didn't just teach me the technical piece of things, but also, helped me with advice in other areas, right? Especially as an introvert that was learning a sales role, taught me some of those soft skills and helped me gain confidence and success in that role. And so, early on, I think it was just working for some good leaders and managers that cared about developing people. And I don't know that that word mentorship, was ever formally used, in those early days. I think as I progressed through my career, I became at some point in time more intentional about my own personal development and my leadership development. And that's really probably where I realized that, hey, this mentorship, whether it's formally spoken or not, really is an important piece of that, right? And identifying people that have drive and have potential, and supporting them to maximize their skills and help provide feedback and coaching when they're struggling with something, or support when they're struggling with something. And so, over the years, I've worked for a number of great leaders. My boss that I have now, I've worked for a lot of years in different capacities, and he's been a great mentor of mine. His name's Tom, and he's taught me a lot and helped me get to where I am now. But then there's others. Like I said, I mentioned that field technician when I first got my first management opportunity in the mountains there. I don't know that he looked at himself as a mentor of mine, but when I look back, what I learned from him and just observing him and his interactions with the other technicians, and he was a mentor of mine. And I think that's another thing about mentorship, is that you can have mentors that they don't even know that they're your mentors. And there's some folks that I follow in the podcast world and leadership world that I think are mentors of mine, and they probably don't even know that. So I think that can take a lot of different forms. In the position that I'm in now as the president of the organization, I realize how important that is. And I probably am more intentional about that, especially with our leadership team. And hey, who has potential to continue to grow and take on more? And as we grow as an organization, and hopefully as I continue to get additional opportunities down the road, who are the people that have potential to step up and take on more and be in bigger leadership positions here at Tolin? And how can I support that growth and development? And where do they need training, and where do they need coaching, and where do they need experience that they don't have right now? So I'm probably more intentional now about trying to identify folks that I think have that potential and trying to be there as a mentor for them. And I think the last thing I'd say there is that it's a topic of conversation with our leadership team of how important that is for Tolin's success, and encouraging the leadership team to do the same thing. Hey, identify folks that are on your different teams that have a ton of potential and could use some additional support in maximizing that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
You
that's kind of
did.
my take on mentorship. Yeah.
No, it was great. It was great. I was just thinking that I think in my life, I've put such a, I don't know what the word is, but I don't know what the word is, but I put mentorship on such a pedestal, and I saw it as its entity all on its own, and it was very formal, and you had to identify this a mentor, and they were this wiser person than I, and they would teach me the way. And what you said about some of the mentors are informal, and they don't even know that they are acting as a mentor.
hmm
And then as fast as the brain works, that's what came to me is I've had a lot of those people in my life that were unofficial, informal, and probably don't even know that they were mentoring me. And yet that's what it was.
Yeah.
And then again, as fast as the brain processes it, you said the word potential, and I'm an former HR guy, and there's quote unquote hypo programs, high potentials, right?
hmm
And those hypo individuals are offered something, professional development.
hmm
And maybe the word mentorship doesn't need to be as formal in my brain. It's something that is maybe just giving to another person, or providing some guidance in their career above and beyond what they even know possible. And I think that's what I'm hearing from, and not to put words in your mouth, but long story short is maybe it doesn't need to be as formal as my brain is telling me.
I would agree with that. And I think it can be formal. And I think there's something about if you desire a mentor, and if there's things that you want to achieve, going out and seeking a mentor, and formally asking somebody, hey, will you be my mentor? And here's some things that I could use some help and support on. But I think a lot of it is informal, right? And even mentoring people that are outside of business, and I talk about the coaching that I enjoy doing with my boys, and, whatever you're involved in your community. I think there's ways that you can help affect and improve people's lives, and help provide opportunities for people. And I think that's all kind of a form of mentorship. So I agree. It can be formal. And I think as leaders, we should be intentional about that. But I think a lot of it's informal as well, at least in my experience.
Love it. And I think I want to say cool, but that doesn't illustrate really what I want to say. I'm impressed. I want to compliment you that you and your leadership team are also talking about the importance of mentorship. It's one thing for the president to think it or express it or perform it. It's another thing when the president is talking with his colleagues about the importance of this element of professional development, and then it starts to trickle down. And that's when
Yeah.
we start to make real change in my experience.
Yeah, I agree. And we didn't dive too much into Tolin at the start of the conversation, but Tolin is a company that's been around since 1948, so 77 years now almost. And the company's grown and evolved a lot over the years. We're private equity owned these days, and have been for about 20 years, and so we've seen a lot of growth and change over the different PE ownership groups that we've had over the last 20 years. Um, but the point is, like, hey, we're a lot bigger, and we've evolved a lot over those years. But I think we still have kind of a family team, small business sort of cultural feel, right? And for me, I think it's super important as we continue to grow and scale and make acquisitions and grow in different markets. Without that mentorship, without being intentional about maintaining the culture, it's going to start to feel more corporate, and you're not going to have the retention that we've had. And so that's a big focus of mine and our leadership team. We just got done last week with a kind of an offsite planning meeting for 2025, and part financial and business planning, but part strategic planning. And this was a topic conversation that we spent a half a day on, was the culture at Tolin and how we continue to maintain that, how we continue to make sure that it's not just the leadership team that recognizes and feels that culture, but all the different groups throughout the organization. As we hire new people, how do we kind of instill that? So it's, as we grow and scale here at Tolin, I think we need to maintain a focus on that if we're going to maintain that culture and that family feel and some of the legacy that we have, and maintain the tenure of the employees here.
And so it's like best practice stuff you're talking about.
Yeah.
We hear it a lot, we see it a lot, we read it a lot, and I don't know that it's practiced a lot. So kudos to you yet again.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
All right, so we're getting near the end of our time. I want to close with two questions.
Mm-hmm.
The first is, you mentioned some podcasts and leaders and thought leaders that you like to listen to. Who are some of those?
Yeah. So podcasts that I've been listening to for a long time, and again, probably one of those mentors that probably doesn't even know he's a mentor of mine, is Ryan Hawk and the Learning Leader podcast. I found him a number of years ago and started listening to his podcast and following him. And then actually learned that he had a leadership circle that I ended up getting involved in. And they did monthly Zoom calls, and we did an in-person summit. And so, he's had a big influence on my leadership development. And so I still follow his podcast and listen to him. He and Brooke Cups recently wrote a book called The Score That Matters. And so that's a recent book that I read that I enjoyed. Some of the other podcasts, I like The Hidden Brain. I also like to learn about human psychology. And so that's kind of an intriguing one for me. And there's some other leadership podcasts out there. Listening to an audiobook right now called Principles by Ray Dalio. He's the founder, Bridgewater. And so that's really kind of an interesting book on a lot of decision-making processes is analytical, but they also make sure that they, are empowering people, and that they're soliciting feedback and input and perspectives from different people throughout the organization, even though a lot of the decision-making processes are more analytical and data-driven. So that one's kind of interesting. And then I always have on my nightstand, one that's just one I can read and decompress. I tend to gravitate towards more historical nonfiction or outdoor adventure sort of books. There's one that I'm reading right now called The Road to Surrender, and it was about the main decision makers in the end of World War II when the atomic bombs were dropped, and the decisions to use the atomic bombs, and the Japanese decision to the surrender after those were used. And so it's interesting to learn about the history of that sort of stuff, but it's also when you think about it as a leader, to the gravity of those sort of decisions that those folks made at that point in time. It's kind of puts things in perspective and some of the decisions that I have to make here on a regular basis, right? And then, there's other fun stuff. I'm reading the Harry Potter series with my son right now as well. So those
Cool.
are some of the things that I'm reading and listening to.
I love it. All right, we'll include some links and notes to what you said in the show notes below. Thank you for that. I've got some
Sure.
listening to do too. Before we say goodbye, is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to?
Oh gosh. I think we covered a lot. I've really enjoyed this. You and I, had talked obviously before this, and I mentioned Ryan, and I listen to his podcast on a regular basis. And one question that he normally asks at the end of the podcast is, "Hey, if you were a 20-something-year-old person and you're starting out your career, what's something that you wish somebody had told you?" And so I think about that because he asked that question of most of his guests, and for me. Early on in my career, I was into sports and the outdoors, and I'd worked hard and I was successful, but I don't know that I was super intentional about my own personal development, right? I'd go into work and I'd work hard, and then I'd go home and I'd ride my bike and I'd play hard and I'd hang out with my friends, but I don't know early in my career that I was really intentional about leadership podcasts and being a better leader, being a better person. And I've certainly put more emphasis on that. And the second half of my career, and looking back, somebody who's early and starting out, I think, being intentional and spending time on your own personal development and recognizing what some of your strengths and weaknesses are. And there's so much good content out there today that you can pick up on and find something you're interested in and make yourself a better person or better leader, rather than early in my career, spending hours listening to sports radio and something like that, right?
Sounds like we could have used the same mentor at our age, at those
Yeah.
early 20s or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah.
That's great
So,
guidance.
yeah.
Please. Did I cut you off again?
That's all I had. Nope. You're good. Yeah, that's all I had.
Sorry, I'm a New Yorker. I have a habit of doing that, but thank you.
Not a problem. I am as well, so I get it.
That's right. That's right. I'm just looking over here because I want to recap what you said about tenure and why Tolin has been known, or at least has achieved, a lot of tenure with people. So my words, a strict focus, if you will, diligent focus on hiring the right people, knowing what your culture is, knowing who fits, knowing who doesn't fit, knowing questions to ask to try to pull that out of people. So hiring the right people. Once you get them, onboarding, training, development, and mentorship, continuous growth. I think you even said continuous growth throughout their career. So it's not like a one and done. It is throughout.
That's correct. And it can't be just the technical training, the technical skills that they're responsible for, but also, the personal interactions, the conflict resolution, the, relationship building, the communication. You gotta round out those skills as well.
Yes. Integral to our growth as humans, for sure.
For sure.
It's an adult thing that needs to happen more often than I think it does.
I agree. Yep.
Treat people with respect, the golden rule.
Yes.
You talked about empowerment and autonomy.
Yeah.
Which to me has an equal sign of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you hire the right people, you train them, you treat them with respect, you empower them to be the experts, you trust them to do so.
That's correct. Yeah. And I think part of that is also, hey, you have to set clear expectations. And that doesn't mean you're not holding people accountable if they're not, meeting those expectations. But you also have to be honest and direct with that feedback and letting them know that they're not meeting those expectations and why and what they can do to continue to improve, right? Yeah, I think if you have the right people and you've trained them and they have the skills to do the job and you've set clear expectations, empower them to make decisions, and they're going to make mistakes. And as long as they're not huge mistakes that are going to seriously cost the company, hey, we've all made mistakes. And I think some of the best lessons in life are learning from those mistakes. And so, empowering people and letting them make decisions and make mistakes.
Great call out. I had a old client, actually, cheesy, but he said, fail. All fail really means is first attempt in learning.
Yeah. I think I've heard that before. I love that one.
Cheesy, but great.
Yeah.
And then I wrote my own analogy. I used a bike. You had talked about like the interconnectivity of everybody's job, the importance of what I do to the broader whole. And I like the hub and spoke model. That makes sense to me. So it's like recognizing that all of the spokes are integral to the integrity and the strength of the wheel. Right. So my job, whatever I may do, turning screws or leading the company, is important for the health of Tolin. And if we can, as employees, recognize that importance, I think that's the sense of belonging and connectivity a lot of people want and maybe is lacking in some other organizations. So again, kudos to you. That was the recipe that I had taken notes on when we talked about tenure.
Yeah, thanks. And the only thing I'd add to that last point is, there's a component of that you need to have some transparency from the high level, right? Hey, here we are PE owned, and here's what our ownership group expectations are and goals are, right? And as an organization, we have to figure out how to get there. Everybody plays a part in that, but I can't hide what those expectations are of Tolin from other leaders in the group. That they need to know, hey, as a team, this is what is expected of us and what our goals are, and everybody plays a part in getting there, and let's work together to figure out how we can do that as a team. And there's times that we have a number of different branches here at Tolin, and some branches are going to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting. But other times we're going to be making more investments in those places, and other branches and other departments are going to have to do more of the heavy lifting. So I think being transparent about what the goals and the expectations are at a broader level, and also how we're performing, the monthly and annual financial results that they're part of. And I think if you have that transparency and you empower people, they do take ownership because they kind of recognize that the part they play in the overall success of the business.
Awesome. Mike, I'm going to expose you a little bit. This was your first podcast.
It was. Yeah. How'd I do, Darren?
Dude, you were great. This was awesome. This was rich.
Thanks.
This is what I find interesting. This is what I hope to accomplish. This being what we've talked about, right? Just to pull the curtain back a little bit, you and I talked about topics and questions we wanted to touch upon. And in a very, what I think, organic way, we touched on all of them, except for the introvert playing the otherwise extroverted sales game. So you mentioned it a couple of times. We didn't get a chance to dig into it, but I thought this was great, man. I thought you did a great job.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate the opportunity, and maybe we can do it again, and we can dig more into the introvert playing the extroverted role.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here. See you next time.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate it. Take care.